Okay, here we are back, and hour number 2, and we're going to talk this hour to someone who has a tremendous amount of knowledge, wisdom, gaining all the time in terms of his grasp of the world, and it's always fun and interesting and educational to spend time with Dr. Bill, who is standing by, I think now, from northern San Diego County.
Absolutely. I'm all set, and we've got a lot of things to cover. The first thing I think that's most important is an article that just came in this evening before the show that is from my colleagues. I belong to the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons that also Rand Paul and Ron Paul belong, and I've been a member for many years.
Right.
And I've just got an article here that I think I should read aloud, which I think is that important. It's almost like reading the Declaration of Independence, only this is for physicians. And it's written by Richard Emmerling, who's a nephrologist practicing in New York City and the author of the Physicians' Declaration of Independence. He's also the director of the association now. He's a current director. So I'd like to read that, and because I think people don't understand just how, in terms of like a thermonuclear annihilation bomb, how bad Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, is. And when they read this, they'll understand the corrosive events. This is just a long line of corrosive things that's happened between the doctor-patient relationship over a very long time. So when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one profession to dissolve the financial arrangements which have connected them with Medicare, Medicaid, assorted health maintenance organizations, and diverse third-party payers, and to assume among the other professions of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that the physician's primary responsibility is toward the patient, and that to assume the sanctity of the relationship, payment for service should be decided between the physician and the patient, and that, as in all transactions, in a free society, this payment is to be mutually agreeable. Only such a financial arrangement will guarantee the highest level of commitment and service of the physician to the patient, restrain outside influence or in decision-making, and assume that personal information be kept confidential. Right? Very good.
Got it, yeah.
The financial arrangements between physician and the third parties have become so destructive to the patient-physician relationship and to the medical profession as a whole that it is the right and obligation of the members of the profession to abolish them. Prudence will dictate that arrangements long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience has shown that physicians are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. When a long train of abuses and usurpations evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is the right, it is the duty to throw off such agreements and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient suffrage of this profession, and such is now the necessity that constrains them to alter their former financial arrangements. The history of the present system is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having its direct effect the establishment of an absolute tyranny over the medical profession. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. Now, these are facts that I can verify are absolutely true. And I've worked in both the United States and Canada, so I can tell you socialist countries are where we're going, and it's horrifying. Horrifying in its most vile extent. Now, let me read these. The tyranny began during the Second World War when the government gave tax subsidies to employers who offered health insurance benefits, thus penalizing and disenfranchising individuals. Number two, the government created and subsidized health maintenance organization entities designed to ration health care by capitation. These incentives set patient against physician, thus destroying this sacred trust. The government in 1965, in its infinite wisdom and going far beyond its powers as set out in the Constitution, decreed that the poor and the elderly should receive health care benefits funded by the taxpayer. Thus came into existence Medicare and Medicaid, massive entitlements that are bankrupting the federal and many state governments. Alarmed by the rising healthcare costs that it has engendered, the government set out to restrain fees to physicians. These price controls increased healthcare spending as volume services went up and quality went down. No other profession in the United States is denied the ability to raise fees to cover increasing costs of doing business. The government entitled HIPAA, forcing billions to comply and with no positive impact on patient care. the government passed the substantial growth rate formula, which lowers Medicare physician payment when total spending and volume increase, virtually assuming a downward spiral in payments. The government and HMO now limit fees to physicians by payments for performance based on practice guidelines. Beyond insulting our ethic, this destroys our professional autonomy. Congress, the President, and the Supreme Court have conspired to completely take over all aspects of the healthcare system, with all patient encounters feeding into a national database. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A system whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free profession.
Well, I agree.
We therefore understand physicians of the United States of America, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name of our patients solemnly publish and declare that we will withdraw our participation in all above described third-party payment systems. Therefore and forever we shall agree to provide our services directly to our patients and be compensated directly by them in accordance with the ancient customs of our profession. The patient's medical interactions with us will remain confidential. We pledge the highest level of service and dedication to their well-being. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Richard Ammerling, M.D., New York City.
That's a good speech, good statement.
Yeah, I think it actually summarizes it. Now, people don't understand. When I remember before Medicare started in Canada, when the average doctor would take whatever the patient could pay, basically. A lot of time care is provided free. What happened is the government interfered, the prices went through the ceiling. For example, when they decided they were going to do a heart bypass called a CABG, or coronary bypass, they had to do a submission to a federal government. And a senior resident at the Cornell University in New York City made a interesting observation. He said, well, you know, we figured this procedure at the time, this is back in the late 70s, which should probably cost about $300. Well, why don't we just submit
$300?
$300.
Huh.
But why don't we submit it and just add two more zeros, and we'll say $30,000.
Why not?
Why not? And they did, and guess what? The government said, well, okay. So you have some physicians that are making $30 million a year, and other physicians who are barely making it, who are providing the bulk 98% of the care except for highly interventional treatment. We have drug companies that are driving the price up of dangerous drugs that are improperly approved, when other drugs that might be available, or natural nutraceuticals, the FDA, the Fatal Drugs Allowed, will purposely suppress. Any doctor that innovates, like Dr. Russell Blaylock and his neurotrauma unit that would give high-dose magnesium and reduce spinal cord gliosis, intracranial hypertension after a closed-head injury or neurosurgery to reduce intracranial hypertension, is a simple treatment, but that simple thing of just adding magnesium becomes like a monumental hurdle. And the reason why? Because you've got practice guidelines, you've got a medical profession shackled by state licensure, by the state government and the federal government, and you have the cost driven through the ceiling by malpractice insurance, where a doctor can lose more income in one lawsuit than his entire income for his life. That's how bad it is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what the government's decided to do is they said, well, what we're going to do is we're not going to restrain the cost of drugs or medical treatment. We're not going to restrain the cost of monopolized companies that make medical devices like one tube for, say, draining kidneys, which should be a piece of plastic that costs $3, but it's $1,600. What we're going to do is we're going to kill Granny. And we're going to do what the British have done, called the Liverpool Protocol, where last week a doctor has announced that 29% of people that die in Britain die of starvation, dehydration, and complete lack of any medical care whatsoever, including antibiotics, even the most decent things that you do to an animal. In fact, it would be more kind to have a funeral service in the patient's room and give them a lethal injection. That would be more kind than the kind of treatment that they're giving in Britain and Canada.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you. Yeah, you got a point.
So to me, I am disgusted by the gutlessness of the doctors who won't sign this. And it's a call to the citizenry to understand that as a physician, I have been fired so many times for standing up for the injured worker who should not be sent back to work or should not have their benefits cut off, or even widows, in court been threatened with death, been sent packets of money, been fired on the spot and had to find a job in another state, was a senior director of clinics. And I can tell you, if you're not enraged by Obamacare, well, you're going to not believe what's going to happen. It will destroy the economy. It will destroy the profession. If you have a bad car accident on the U.S. freeway, which is, by the way, killing more people than anywhere else in the world, including these so-called wars, what will happen is they will say, gee, that trauma center got closed, and to bring your wife and your child that are now injured in the car accident, it's going to take an extra hour and a half. By the way, there's a waiting list, and if they do an Apache score on you and you're too old, too frail, too this or that, they'll say, gee, you know what, we've got to play what's called monitor roulette, which means that we got 10 sick people, we got to do triage, and we got 5 monitors.
Yeah.
If you're one of the lucky...
Would you mind waiting out in the parking lot? There's a nice park bench out there and a little fountain, and you relax out there.
What they'll do is they'll give you an ice pack, stick you in the hallway, and have someone hold your hand and say a prayer as you die.
That's about it. You got it, William. Hold on just a second. We'll pause and come right back with Dr. Bill as we continue, and the state of our health care in this country continues to become more nightmarish all the time. Okay, back with Dr. Bill. A quick survey.
Get into Fukushima a little later, but I've got an interesting story here with a statement by Hillary Clinton, who contacted the head of Pakistan. And I'm going to actually read a part of her statement that was here. It says, I once again reiterated our deepest regrets for the tragic incident in Salalah last November. I offered our sincere condolences to the families of the Pakistani soldiers who lost their lives.
Right.
Foreign Minister Carr and I acknowledge the mistakes that resulted in the loss of Pakistani military lives. We are sorry for the losses suffered by the Pakistani military. We are committed to working closely with Pakistan and Afghanistan to prevent this from ever happening again. Now, the real background is this, people may or may not know if they don't follow the news closely, is that the Pakistani troops were caught firing on NATO troops in Afghanistan. That's what happened.
And they took them out.
They took them out. And what happened is the Americans put drones in there and actually killed the Pakistani troops who were shooting at NATO troops in Afghanistan at the border.
Right.
So what's going on here is that they're going to pay $1.8 billion in arrears for military hardware and material going to Pakistan, right?
Uh-huh.
So Pakistan won't hit every truck coming in with a charge for $5,000. Now, of course, there's also terrorism happening because the Haqqani network and the Afghan Taliban are inside there. And Taliban, of course, are the crazies. And by the way, the crazies are for hire by the various arms of the CIA. And all of this is, of course, for purpose. I mean, they're the best enemy you can buy, if you want.
Best enemy money can create. That's right.
Right. Now, of course, no one's talking about the fact that the most armed nation, aside from Israel in the Middle East, is Pakistan. Armed with the most advanced nuclear technology that we gave America through AQ Khan over decades in multiple administrations to make certain that the entire Middle East would eventually blow up with Muslims having the bomb. Right?
Well, they already have it.
And they already have it, and they have lots of it. In fact, they've also have it from North Korea, which we, by the way, rate, I think, somewhere around the first 2 years of the second term of George W. Bush. There were still open not only websites, but secure websites to military and nuclear technology to transfer all kinds of advanced technology to the North Koreans that we had agreed and given all kinds of material and technology to the North Koreans to make certain that they could make weapons that could eventually strike the American coast. And, of course, I think in the 2 years before Bush was taken out of power at the end of his second term, the North Koreans test-fired a missile and was no more than 124 miles, I think, from Anchorage, Alaska, along the coast. And that's without proper GPS coordinates, just targeting, kind of shooting in the dark, as they say. So what we have here is another wild card that nobody's talking about. They don't talk about the wild card of the biopreparat Russian-made weapons that were hired immediately after Glasnost and Perestroika by Syria and Iran. They don't talk about the 200,000 missiles that are Jafar 5 that can be targeted by GPS that can hit within 10 square meters anywhere inside Israel or...
Wait. 200,000?
200,000.
Where are these located?
They're located north of the Litani River in Lebanon. They're located all over Syria.
How big are these missiles? How big are these missiles? That's an awful lot. I could buy 20,000.
These are missiles that can go 200 to 300 miles minimum, and they are big enough to carry a payload anywhere from 300 to 500 pounds. They can carry chemical, biological.
That's an awful lot of missiles. Are we sure about that?
Yes, these are various sizes. These are not the bottle rockets you see coming in from Gaza.
Right.
These are GPS targetable missiles, and I have numerous sources now on this. The number is actually up around 200,000, not 50,000, not 100,000, around 200,000. Now, the Green Pine missile system and the Patriot 2 system, which is a piece of crap, that's the technical word for it.
POC.
Yeah, piece of crap, POC. And the fact is that in the 1991 war, when America did their attack, remember now it was delayed. Remember it was supposed to be in 1990, the event happened where Qatar was, quote, attacked after April Glaspie allowed, and made a statement to Saddam Hussein.
Kuwait?
To go into Kuwait, And when he went into Kuwait, which of course they were slant drilling into Iraqi territory.
And stealing millions of gallons of oil.
Yeah, and he said, hey, we don't have any problem. And of course he thought, well, I'm one of their guys. I'm a CIA. I was even picked up in the streets of Baghdad by George Bush Sr. He was recruited personally by George Bush Sr., recruited Saddam Hussein to be the Baghdad guy that was going to pull all of the disparate groups together in Iraq. And it's funny, after a while, just like Mubarak in Egypt, that kept that place from blowing up between the Christians and the various different segments that are going on. And of course, that so-called Arab Spring is failing in Egypt because the military are right back in power, and they have let the president Morsi be, we'll call it nominated, but he was nominated after he was castrated because he has no real power. So what's going on is the West is trying to push as hard as they can to have the King of Saudi Arabia and the Sunni Muslim countries take over the oil of northern Iraq, which is now 8 times more than Saudi Arabia,
right,
and to castrate and destroy the western area of Iran where all the oil is, the old ancient empire of Elam, and to take over all the oil, which, by the way, would be used by China, because most of their oil, that gives them incredibly secure oil because of pipelines being built between Iran and China. Now, why is this all important? Because the real war, the Third World War has already started. People need to realize it started back, the pre-war started at Oklahoma City. The real war started on September 11th, 2001. And now we're into the 11th year. Now, the controlled demolition of the world economy and the forced fall of the Assad regime, which they're doing the very best, and the Russians are continuing to say no means no.
The Russians aren't doing anything yet, not that we're seeing.
Well, we know behind the scenes the Russians are passing, even though they're saying they're going to sell Iran and Syria the S-300 system, it's already in place. The anti-aircraft system, that's why they were probing with this Turkish jet, because the Turks are basically cannon fodder for NATO.
They're supposedly flying their jets along the Syrian border now, too, so we'll see. There's plenty of opportunities for the Russians or Syrians to knock down Turkish junk. I mean, jets. Yeah, right.
What happens is they want to put something really good into Syrian airspace to really test out or probe their defense.
They would like to. Great laboratory. Be right back.
Yeah.
Okay, back to Dr. Bill. We've heard a lot of interesting things already. Including Hillary's $100 million a month apology to Pakistan. That's fine.
$1.8 billion are going to pay back payments, too. Here's what I think is I call a readjusted current timeline, which I think is a good kind of like a weather diagnosis for where we're going, in a sense, prophetically. Right now, we see Europe scrambling and saying, everything's okay. And what they've done is taking really good glue, super glue, and some pieces of, let's say, aluminum. And they stuck them in holes in the bottom of the boat saying, look, we've held our hands on it. The glue should hold. Everything's cool. And already we're seeing leaks in some of the pieces of plastic or metal are popping off the holes. and they're spurting with, you know how you get that parabolic jet of water
Yep.
that's shooting up? Well, that's what we're seeing, parabolic jets of debt. And, of course, their solution is, hey, let's make more debt. The solution is, let's print more money.
Well, no one's going to stop them, so why not?
No, not only that, the problem is, you see, the problem is, well, where do we get the money? Oh, we'll take it from the real economy and to put it into the artificial bubble economy.
There is no real economy.
And that would be like saying, well, I'll tell you what, it's the vampire convention, and we have a lot of people here that's serving us. So the only place to get blood is to take it from everybody serving us. And eventually there's nobody to serve you because you've taken all their blood. So that's what kind of situation we have. You can't continue contracting the economy, continue contracting credit, and expect that there will be an economy. And when you add things like the Obamacare, and we had Michael Velarde on as an IRS tax agent on last weekend, a few weeks ago. If they go to the shows there and look back at NutriMedical.com, they can listen to those shows. There's 10 taxes that are in there that will absolutely, completely devastate the U.S. economy. So if they don't repeal this bill completely and start off from scratch, they need to start off from scratch with a whole different layout like that.
Bill, let me just ask you a general question. Now, you're a professional in the medical field and have been for a long time. We have a country that spends $1 trillion on defense. It's all there, and probably that much again in black ops.
Right.
Why can't this country, and shouldn't it morally, give free health care to every legitimate American citizen? Shouldn't it?
Sure. I'll give you a real simple solution to it, and I can do it in probably a couple sentences. Firstly, we should abolish all coding and fee coding.
Yeah.
We should abolish the electronic medical record and have it totally between the patient and the doctor. It's not a database for the government to get their paws on, or insurance companies. We should never have insurance companies insuring anybody. We should simply have it set up where if a doctor practices and does a certain number of hours of work, they get paid a certain wage for the number of hours they provide. And if they get sick, the doctor it still gets a wage, or and if they are too old, they get a pension and they can work part-time. That's a real simple solution to it. Very simple. You can put the money into a pot whichever way you want. If you wanted to have a health tax, which is a very small tax, but ultimately the fee should be decided between the patient and the doctor. And the way that can be done is this: you have a simple wage that's set up, and you have the doctor does a certain
Bill, I don't want to seem idealistic. Why don't we just give the people medical care? They do it in Cuba.
Well, you can do that. I'm talking about a system that can be done that way.
Why bill anybody for anything? We don't
bill them. No. Here's why you do it. You put it into a pot. Give an example. Let's say the decision is made between ultimately the patient is the person who has to make the decision on what it costs. If you go down to a grocery store and you say, I'm going to buy something, you don't have to actually pay the bill, but you can be the one that's the payor, the one that decides it. So, for example, like I mentioned about heart bypass, why did they manage to put in a $30,000 bill for a heart bypass procedure and get some government department to approve it, and they thought, well, we hit the lotto. So we had an awful lot of people that heart bypass surgeries that were done, when in fact the research has shown that these people don't live long. They don't. They don't live significantly longer than people. They may have a little less angina for a while, but they also throw off microemboli when they get the ECMO machine. And many other approaches, including extracorporeal counterpulsation, total change in diet, other things.
We know that there are natural ways to reverse blocked arteries.
So they don't want any of these natural ways involved because remember now you got a financial model that's set up. And I agree. I think what we should do is you can set up a simple thing where if you have a pool of money that comes in because, let's say, you have a health tax, it goes to a local community. Ultimately, the person that decides is the person. And for example, if you go to a restaurant and you get good service, you get a base charge that will go back to the doctor, and there can be quote a tip. I remember talking to my colleagues. They were practicing in the Eastern Bloc in Czechoslovakia before. One was a nephrologist years ago, and he told me what they did is they paid them a relatively low regular wage, but if they did really good service, they would quote get tips from the various people that were involved, and we could have that system set up to make it very, very simple. And we wouldn't have exorbitant fees or money that would be going through corruption. What we have is we don't have the decision being made between the doctor and patient. It becomes a big government office, and it becomes a big insurance office where only a tiny fraction of the money that's brought in actually goes to pay for medical care. I think the total number of dollars spent to pay doctors in the system is something like 13%. Good chunk of it goes off to maybe 30% to hospitals, and the rest of it goes to drug companies and manufacturer of medical equipment. That's crazy. So when people think, oh, those bad doctors, well, the bad doctors, basically, if you guarantee them a decent wage, gave them benefits, also allowed them to have other workers that they could hire, and quote, the system would pay for them. For example, if I was a doctor, you want doctors, it's almost like taking an engineer and saying, do you want doctors like engineers to be turning bolts? Do you want them to be setting dressing? Do you want them to be doing mundane things when really, if they had the people working for them that were paid for by some payor system, if you need an hour with a doctor, you got an hour. Isn't that a radical? And the doctor in the whole day might actually see 10 or 12 patients, because underneath that doctor, there may be another set of health professionals, from nurse practitioners to nutritionists to acupuncturists and people doing other things like mild hyperbaric therapy or energetic treatments or other things that are radical and new, and, you know, maybe going to the stem cell bank for their stem cells they banked 10 years earlier, and then pulling those out and giving them back to them by an IV, or even we call Hospital Without Borders, going out in a van to their home so they don't even have to go to the hospital.
Gee, house calls. I like that.
Yeah, the thing is, a lot of the stuff that we do, like building these giant, expensive hospitals, all these oxygen lines and everything, is unnecessary. A lot of the things that we do, for example, if you give low-dose IPT, insulin-potentiated chemo, you can do it in someone's kitchen. No kidding.
Yeah, shouldn't do it anywhere. But
you just have a little finger stick to measure their blood sugar to make sure it doesn't get too low. You want to get their blood sugar down with an insulin drip. Oh, you're good. You're in the window. You're 45 milligrams per deciliter. We start the drip with the genetically...
We don't do chemotherapy, Bill. Come on, we don't.
No, but I'm talking about low dose. Low dose.
We don't do any dose. What we do is we say, here's your therapy. No more dairy, no more meat, no more processed food, no more toxicity in your diet.
I'm even talking about one option, okay? Exactly. You remove all the toxigenic things that induce cancer, and of course, we're going to have a very large load of illness because of genetically modified food, irradiated food. Now, Fukushima, millions and millions of people will get cancer, and of course, the government will say, well, we don't know that Fukushima caused this.
We have no idea.
And of course, the same with the drugs like Actos. Now, 80% increased risk of bladder cancer and diabetics. A giant lawsuit against the manufacturer, SmithKline Beecham. Amazing.
I agree. All right, just a sec, Bill. Hold on. We'll continue in just a couple minutes. Back with Dr. Bill, and let's take a look at...
forget Fukushima.
Let's take a look at the tragedy over there, which continues to worsen and worse. It's amazing. You saw the footage of the destruction, or the dismantling, or the demo of the upper levels of what they're telling us is reactor building 4. We don't know what the spent fuel pool status is, but they were sure taking those beams down with a lot of gusto.
Well, I think that... they're probably scrambling because they know if they don't remove those fuel rod assemblies,
they can't. The fuel rods are all broken, or most of them.
Right, and the point is they won't even pull out. They have to assemble a crane first. They put a cap over it, but they don't have a superstructure in order to attach it to. Basically, the fix on the weekend, by 4 a.m. Japanese Standard Time, JST, today, on the Tuesday, they were going to reach a critical temperature in reactor cooled cooling 4, which would have been critical, meaning it was a time when that temperature would reach a level high enough to cause the fuel rod assemblies to explode and to pop their corks, releasing 30 to 100 times the radiation level last March, if only 10% of those fuel rod assemblies blow. If all of them blow, the estimated amount of radiation, we talked about this with our nuclear expert, Chris Harris, that's his radio name on the show. He's on it every Thursday, third hour, and often Fridays, too, in the third hour, that the amount could be as high as 3,000 times. And that's just that one area. And the sky shine, which is the radiation that would occur above it, would make it impossible to service any of the other reactor sites, 6 reactors and 7 storage areas. So the first thing is, depending on the direction of the radiation, people already if you look at radiation maps done by Chris Busby in terms of taking air filters and actually analyzing the radiation based on GPS coordinates in Japan, the radiation level there in the slow burn right now, but it's going to get real hot. And my guess is the next burp of radiation is probably weeks to months away, probably this summer, and it'll mean that there'll be a mass evacuation, if it should be a mass evacuation of northern Tokyo and all of Honshu. If that occurs, of course, probably 83% of that radiation, which has been coming in our direction, will come either in the black current, they call it, or it will be coming in an air mass, a plume, a giant radioactive plume that will come across, and no one in the airlines will know that on a specific date they're flying through a giant radioactive plume.
And no one's going to tell.
Concentrating that air, let's say 30,000 feet, that will then have to be compressed down to an effective altitude of 8,000 feet inside the cabin of the aircraft, and further concentrate the radioisotopes. So let's say if you had 3,000 becquerels of radiation per cubic meter.
It's amazing. Just amazing when you think about it.
Yeah, it's insane. And we don't get data. I'm getting no response whatsoever from Senator Wyden's office.
What's the deal with him? He shut up? Somebody told him to shut him up.
And his assistant refuses to contact me, Mary Gautreaux. You know?
Really?
Yeah, I'll give the number right now for people in Oregon that are listening. That's 503-326-7525. Mary Gautreaux, that's Senator Wyden's Portland office.
So somebody told him to shut up?
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm not going to shut up, and I'm going to call Senator Dianne Feinstein, who went over there too. They need to stay freaked out by this. Just because it scared you when you were there.
No. Ron Wyden should have never stopped talking. Somebody told him to stop.
Well, that's not good enough, okay? It's not good enough, not just because he wants to protect the people in his constituency. It's because it's going to crash civilization. Now, people don't understand what I mean by this. Firstly, if you decrease mitochondrial function through acute radiation sickness or subacute, you call it subacute radiation sickness, where people don't die instantly, but their immune system fails, you dramatically increase the risk of a pandemic. Okay? Dramatically. Now, we're talking about the emergence where you just say, let's say you have a 20% decrease in the overall capacity of natural killer cell lymphocytes, neutrophils, to any infection, viral, bacteria, whatever, and you increase the mutagenicity to further mutate. So you got, now the latest, it's called Vaccinate, which is this new Vax 161 they're testing, and they're ready to launch it. Of course, it'll be part of the mandatory Obamacare and mandatory World Health Organization. Most people don't realize in 2006, all 183 nations signed over to the World Health Organization, the United Nations, their military, their medical systems, and can force vaccinate everybody on Earth at gunpoint in every country. That's already done. It's not maybe that'll happen in the future. People need to read. There's a very important skill I learned when I was 3 years of age. It's called reading. A lot of people don't want to read, and they think, oh, that's just a conspiracy theory. How about go to the main sources? You can see it's all published. We're not inventing it. When you put information up on your website, Jeff, and I know I do put it on mine, we're not inventing these or just kind of having a fugue state from taking some bad food, you know, like or having magic mushrooms. No, what we're doing is we're actually cutting and pasting articles that are in the regular media.
Mm-hmm.
We don't even have to invent this stuff. And then I have other classified and other sources of information that verifies it's even worse than that. Just like, the Russians are saying that they'll take off the 2010 ban to give the S-300 system to Syria and Iran, signed by Medvedev. This is a big Russian game. They've already given it to them. Come on now. They're not going to let that situation go over the edge. And of course, they're finding plutonium everywhere, in stasium in the children in Japan, and plutonium everywhere. And
but what's really weird is that, and I mentioned it earlier, in fact, last night when Yochi was on, and I think Michael too, that black mold. We got black mold here in so many houses, and it can be fatal. We know that. But it's now being found, as you know, Bill, on the streets, on the walls of buildings, on the asphalt, the concrete, doesn't matter. And this stuff is spreading. It's like some 1960s Japan monster movie.
Well, you know what it is? Let me call it this is the Fukushima Fukushima fungi. Let's call it that, the Fukushima fungi. Now, the fact is, you may not have a radiation detector, but if you're walking along and see black mold in your tube trains in Japan, or inside the air-conditioned offices in Japan, it may not just be the regular Stachybotrys totaro. It may actually be what's called a radiobacterium fukushima. So what you're dealing with, if you're dealing with bacteria that just, it's almost like, let's put it this way, the fungus snorts radioisotopes like it's cocaine. Okay?
Which is
and
now legal in Colombia, by the way, folks.
And the fungus says, "Whoa, I'm going to grow now like crazy."
I can
in other
do
words,
anything.
It's stressed by the radiation, and now it really takes over. And so when you see this black mold growing, you know you've got a highly radioactive area. Now, it also radioconcentrates this stuff, too, which makes it particularly bad because if it dries and dehydrates, it gets into air conditioning systems, or people scuff it up when they're walking, or, you know, it's inside plenum chambers and air conditioners. It's going to get even worse because it concentrates. It grabs and radioconcentrates. And that's the other thing is most people don't realize this gets in the food chain everywhere. And because we don't have any civil defense, and we talked about this with Ann Morrison, our civil defense expert, on Friday last week.
So what was that again?
Civil defense.
What is it?
Ann Morrison, our civil defense. To give you an example,
what is it called, Bill? Civil
defense, yeah.
And what is that?
Yeah, right.
Is that from the 1950s?
Yeah, let me give you a scenario. This is now, let's say, September 11th, 2012. I'm just using this hypothetically, by the way.
Interesting date.
Yeah,
okay.
And we'll assume that we still don't have data from Senator Wyden, whatever, but unknowingly, several flights, Alaska Airlines, one of them, flies through a giant radiation cloud, and everyone on the flight comes off the flight very immediately sick, and people are bleeding from the nose and vomiting blood, and people are finding out they're getting blisters on their hands before they even get to the baggage area, and they're violently dizzy and sick and vomiting and not knowing what the hell happened.
Yeah.
Right? Now, all of a sudden, of course, the news is going to suppress this. Oh, say, how did they get sick? Oh, it's probably bacteria.
No, it was the dry cleaning.
Right, it's dry cleaning. But you know what it is? They left too much dry cleaning on the seat covers. That's right. What it was.
They cleaned those seats in, yeah.
So here's the next thing that happens. That radiation plume decides that it's going to hit an air mass where cold air from Canada hits a warm air mass from the now superheated Gulf of Mexico, which is why the south and the southeastern United States is so hot, is because we have this giant heat engine called the Gulf of Mexico that's not connected to take that heat out to the Gulf Stream. No wonder we're having a super heat wave. You know, you got to get it. 2 years ago, we had Macondo, the devil's food, drilled into against more common sense 1951. They were told at a conference in New Orleans, don't drill there. Now we have that in combination. So here's what's going to happen. Now we have somebody sitting outside, you know, planting their potatoes or, you know, or doing other work around their garden. People not realizing, oh, it looks like it might rain today. And they don't realize that that rain that's going to come down will be like the black rain that fell over Nagasaki and Hiroshima. It's going to be highly radioactive. And if that air mass decides to go from, say, 25 or 30,000 feet and descend to ground level, just because that'll happen, that can happen when you have air masses intersecting, now all of a sudden you have an acute radiation sickness to an area that could be hundreds of miles wide and 1,000 miles long. And the government's not prepared for that.
No.
We don't have any reports. We have no data. Nothing. We don't have even doctors properly trained to pick up acute or subacute radiation sickness. They're not going to have the faintest idea what's going on until everybody is so darn sick. And then what they'll do, their idea, and I know because I work with FEMA, I worked with the CDC and the FBI back in the late 90s, Operation Top Off in Dark Winter. They set up what's called containment zones. And what they do is they are armed containment zones. They set up perimeters. And if you try to escape those perimeters, you know what their plan to do is?
Bang.
And I challenge the FEMA director, they will shoot to kill through the central part of your body or a headshot if it's close enough and put you in a body bag. There's no decon showers. There's nothing prepared to deal with radiation decontamination or triage or anything. It's to basically make sure you don't get out of that containment zone, period.
But it's, you know, people would say, all right, that's interesting, but it's not contagious.
Oh, they don't care. See, they're not even worried. They're not worried about whether it's contagious or you're radioactively exposed to a dirty bomb. They're just going to shoot to kill and stick you in a body bag. That's their policy. People say, oh, no. I challenged the director, and I had a military guy beside me back in 2001, March, 6 months before 9/11, and I challenged the director of FEMA, making a statement at the Adams Mark Hotel in downtown Denver. And the guy beside me with a ton of braids on his chest, and he said, you're not going to get out of here alive, Deagle. I said, watch me. And I chased the FEMA director out the door, firing questions at him because he wouldn't damn well answer me. Now, I work with these characters. I sat there with the director for bioterrorism and the director for FEMA for hazmat on these issues, and I can tell you the government are a combination of stupid, evil, and just plain screwed up, as they say, FUBAR in the military term.
Well, they did. They're stupid is an operative word for much of them. They are stupid.
Yeah, this is really dangerous. And there's no preparedness at all. FEMA, basically, I call it the Federal Emergency Magnification Agency.
You might as well.
Yeah.
Sure. Very good. All right.
Well,
Excellent.
Fukushima rolls on, and I expect, as I say, mid-July, mid-August, we're going to have another burp radiation. We've got not a fleck of data.
Well, they checked a vacuum cleaner in Chiba and found 20,000 becquerels.
What I'm going to next suggest is actually we get people to make model airplanes and put them up, or start buying radiation detectors. We talked about this today, actually, with Ramil from SCMS, one of our sponsors, to get a data logging system. Take your GPS photos with your iPhone and data log it onto your laptop while you're actually flying. Yeah. And we'll get citizens that'll put it together. If the darn government won't do it, we'll do it.
Yeah, we know the darn government's not going to do it. No. Thank you. Have a good 4th of July.
4th of July, as I said, think about what we said in that first segment about the medical issue and how bad this is.
That's right.
Better celebrate. This may be your last 4th of July where it's worse than America's worst a pinch, as they say, of, you know what I mean. It
is true. It is true.
It's pretty terrible.
See you next week, Bill.
Yeah, I love America, but America needs to wake up.
Indeed. All right. Take care.
Take care.
All right. Dr. Bill, and we'll pause and come back.